At 6:23 in the morning on August the 14th, 1943, Obergefreiter Friedrich Weber stood at the summit of Scafell Pike in the Lake District of England, 3,209 feet above sea level, holding a small German flag made from scraps of prison uniform. He had been a prisoner of war for 11 months. He had walked 8 mi through restricted military territory. He had climbed 2,900 feet of elevation in darkness. And now he was planting the flag on England's highest peak, because his commanding officer at Camp 186 Grizedale Hall had told the guards it would prove that German physical superiority remained intact despite captivity. The guards had thought it was a joke. They had given Weber and 6 other prisoners permission to attempt the climb. They had assumed the men would give up after the first mile. Weber had not given up. He had organized the climb for 3 weeks. He had trained his team in secret. And now, at dawn on a Saturday morning, he was standing on top of England, looking down at the country that was holding him prisoner, planting a flag that no one except his fellow prisoners would ever see. The British sergeant who had escorted the group was named Thomas Whitfield from Kendal. Whitfield had been assigned to Camp 186 since its opening in October 1942. He had processed 287 German prisoners when they first arrived. He had watched them organize a camp newspaper. He had confiscated their homemade radio parts twice. And he had approved every escape attempt, knowing they would all fail. But Weber's request was different. Whitfield asked Weber to explain the purpose again. Weber said in careful English that German prisoners needed to prove they could still accomplish difficult physical tasks. That captivity had not made them soft. That if they could climb England's highest mountain, they could maintain military discipline and readiness. Whitfield had granted permission because he thought it was harmless. A group of German prisoners climbing a mountain seemed less dangerous than them sitting around planning actual escapes. Whitfield was wrong about that. Camp 186 Grizedale Hall held 243 German prisoners of war in August of 1943. Most had been captured during the Battle of Britain or in North Africa. Luftwaffe pilots, U-boat crews, Afrika Korps soldiers. They had surrendered to British forces between 1940 and 1942, been shipped to various camps across England, Scotland and Wales. The Lake District received fewer prisoners than most regions because the terrain was mountainous and escape routes seemed obvious. The local authorities worried that German prisoners would simply walk over the mountains into Scotland or to the coast. The prisoners were required to work under Geneva Convention allowances. Most volunteered out of necessity. The pay was 6 pence per day in camp tokens. The tokens could be used at the camp canteen to buy cigarettes, chocolate, writing paper, books. The prisoners could not believe they were being paid at all. Oberleutnant Karl Dietrich had been at Camp 186 since November 1942. Before the war, he had been a Wehrmacht officer, Mountain Infantry Division. He had commanded Alpine troops in Norway and Yugoslavia. The British captured him in May 1941, after his unit was surrounded near Crete. He spent 6 months in a British camp in Egypt before being transferred to Gibraltar, then to England. He arrived at Camp 186 expecting harsh treatment, isolation, poor food, manual labour in mines or factories. Instead, he found a camp in a converted country estate with grounds, a library, recreational facilities, and 2 meals a day that included bread and sometimes meat. Dietrich did not trust any of it. He had been trained to recognize psychological warfare. The British were trying to break German morale by creating an artificial environment of false comfort. The food portions were probably measured to keep prisoners weak. The books in the library were certainly censored propaganda. The recreational time was designed to make them lazy and unprepared for eventual repatriation to combat. Dietrich organized resistance among the prisoners. Not violent resistance, morale resistance. He established an unofficial committee of senior officers who met weekly to discuss maintaining German military discipline and preventing the erosion of combat readiness. The committee developed physical training programs, language study groups, military history lectures. They created structure to counteract British attempts at psychological weakening. In July 1943, the committee examined a topographical map of the Lake District that had been in the camp library. The map showed Scafell Pike, elevation 3,209 foot, the highest point in England. Dietrich's committee concluded that climbing Scafell Pike would demonstrate that German prisoners maintained superior physical conditioning despite captivity. It would prove to the British Guards that confinement had not broken German spirit. It would provide a concrete accomplishment that prisoners could discuss and remember. Dietrich proposed the climb during a committee meeting. He needed volunteers. Weber stepped forward immediately. Friedrich Weber was 26 years old. He had been conscripted into the Wehrmacht in 1939. He had fought in Poland, then France, then was transferred to North Africa with Rommel's Africa Corps. The British captured him near Tobruk in September 1942. Weber had spent 2 months in a transit camp in Alexandria, then been shipped to England in November 1942. He arrived at Camp 186 in late November. Weber believed Dietrich's theories about British psychological tactics because the alternative seemed impossible. If the camp conditions were genuinely this tolerable, if Britain could afford to house prisoners in a country estate with libraries and recreational grounds while fighting a total war, then Germany was losing to an enemy with resources far beyond anything Weber had experienced. Weber preferred to believe the British were manipulating them. The climb plan began in late July 1943. Dietrich proposed it during a committee meeting. The plan was simple. Request permission from camp authorities to climb Scafell Pike as a physical training exercise. Argue it was covered under Geneva Convention provisions for prisoner health and exercise. Make the attempt with 7 men. Plant a small German flag at the summit as proof of completion. Return to camp and document the achievement. The request would require approval from the camp commandant. Dietrich drafted a formal letter. He explained that German prisoners wished to maintain physical fitness through mountain training. He noted that the Geneva Convention required adequate exercise opportunities. He pointed out that supervised outdoor activities would improve prisoner morale and reduce escape attempts. The letter was delivered to the camp commandant, Lieutenant Colonel George Morrison, on July 28, 1943. Morrison read the request twice. His initial instinct was to deny it. Allowing German prisoners to climb mountains near potential escape routes seemed irresponsible. But Morrison's orders from headquarters emphasized prisoner cooperation and morale maintenance. The war was going badly enough without creating additional problems through harsh treatment of POWs. Morrison consulted with his security officer, Captain Peter Lawrence. Lawrence reviewed the proposal and noted several points. Scafell Pike was 8 mi from camp. The route crossed open terrain with no towns or roads suitable for escape. The summit was exposed and visible from miles away. A guard escort could easily monitor 7 prisoners on a mountain with no tree cover above 2,000 feet. Lawrence recommended approval with conditions: 1 guard per 3 prisoners. The climb scheduled for a weekday when civilian hiking traffic was minimal. Prisoners searched before and after. No equipment allowed except water and basic clothing. Morrison approved the request on August 2nd with a note. If the prisoners successfully completed the climb, they would be allowed additional recreational privileges. If they attempted escape or violated any terms, all future outdoor activities would be cancelled for the entire camp. Weber received the news on August 3rd. He had 11 days to prepare. Weber organised the team. 6 other prisoners volunteered. Unteroffizier Klaus Reinhardt, former mountain infantry, age 24, captured in Norway. Gefreiter Hans Keller, former paratrooper, age 23, captured after Crete. Gefreiter Otto Schultz, former infantry, age 27, captured in North Africa. Obergefreiter Peter Lang, former engineer, age 25, captured in France. Gefreiter Wilhelm Koch, former Luftwaffe ground crew age 22, captured after his airfield was overrun in Libya. Obergefreiter Martin Bauer, former artillery, age 28, captured in Tunisia. The team had combined experience in mountain terrain, physical conditioning, and shared belief in Dietrich's theory that maintaining military pride was essential. Training began on August the 4th. The prisoners could not actually practice climbing. The campgrounds were flat. Instead, Weber designed a conditioning program. Morning runs around the camp perimeter, 2 min. Afternoon calisthenics, 1 hour. Evening marching drills, 30 minutes. The training attracted attention from other prisoners. Some joined the exercises, some mocked them. Weber ignored both groups. The British Guards watched the training with amusement. Sergeant Whitfield told his men that the Germans were preparing for a mountain climb, like British schoolchildren preparing for a field trip. The guards expected the prisoners would request to return to camp within 2 hours of starting the climb. The flag was constructed between August 8th and August 11th. The prisoners had no access to German flags. Weber improvised. He obtained 2 pieces of cloth from the camp workshop, one black, one white, both approximately 12 inches square. He sewed them together in a pattern meant to suggest the German military colours. The result was not accurate, but it was recognizable as an attempt at a German flag. Weber hid the flag in his bunk. Dietrich inspected it during a committee meeting. Dietrich approved the flag and instructed Weber to plant it at the summit, take a photograph if possible, then retrieve it before descending. The flag could not be left at the summit. British civilians or authorities would find it and create an incident. The photograph would provide proof of the accomplishment. By August 13th, the team was ready. Morrison confirmed the climb for the next day, Saturday, August 14th. Weather conditions were acceptable. Clear skies, temperature forecast around 59 degrees at base, colder at summit. The prisoners would depart camp at 0300 hours to reach the summit by dawn. Whitfield would lead the guard escort with 2 additional guards, Corporal James Hutchinson from Windermere and Private Robert Ellis from Ambleside. The 3 guards carried no weapons. Camp regulations prohibited armed escorts for recreational activities. The assumption was that prisoners on supervised outings would not attempt escape when cooperation earned them privileges. The climb began at 03:15 hours on August 14th, 1943. The 7 prisoners and 3 guards assembled at the camp gate. Each prisoner carried a small pack with water and extra clothing. Weber carried the hidden flag wrapped inside a spare shirt. Whitfield led the group northwest from camp toward Langdale. The route followed public footpaths and farm roads for 5 miles, then began ascending towards Scafell Pike from the east via the Linkove Beck approach. The first 2 hours were easy walking. Flat terrain, good paths, darkness, but clear enough to navigate by starlight. The prisoners walked in formation. Klaus Reinhardt walked beside Weber at the front. Hans Keller and Otto Schulz walked in the middle. Peter Lang and Wilhelm Koch walked near the rear. Martin Bauer walked at the end, occasionally singing quietly German marching songs. Whitfield walked alongside the group, making conversation. He asked Weber about mountain experience. Weber explained he had trained in the Alps before the war. Whitfield asked if English mountains compared. Weber said politely that he would assess after reaching the summit. At 05:20 hours, the group reached the base of the main ascent. Elevation approximately 800 feet. The path became steeper. Rocky terrain, loose scree, sections requiring use of hands for balance. The guards expected the prisoners to slow down. Instead, the prisoners increased pace. Klaus Reinhardt moved ahead with Weber. The 2 men began setting a rhythm. 20 steps, brief pause, 20 steps, brief pause. The other prisoners matched the rhythm. The guards struggled to keep up. By 0600 hours, the group had reached 2,400-foot elevation. The path was now exposed rock and grass. Wind speed increased. Temperature dropped to approximately 48 degrees. Whitfield called for a rest stop. The prisoners complied, but showed no signs of fatigue. Weber checked the group. Everyone was breathing normally. No one requested to turn back. Whitfield asked if they wanted to continue. Weber confirmed they would reach the summit. The final ascent took 23 minutes. The path was steep, 30-degree incline, loose rocks, exposure on both sides. The prisoners climbed steadily. Klaus and Weber reached the summit first at 06:23 hours. The other 5 prisoners arrived within 3 minutes. The 3 guards arrived 4 minutes after that, breathing heavily. The summit was a rocky plateau, approximately 40 feet across, marked by a stone cairn. Views extended in all directions. Coniston water visible to the south, wastewater to the west, Derwent water to the north. The Irish Sea was barely visible as a grey line on the western horizon. Weber stood at the cairn and looked around. The sun was rising from the east, creating long shadows across the mountain landscape. Weber removed the flag from his pack. He unfolded it carefully. The black and white fabric caught the wind. Weber held the flag above his head for 5 seconds, then placed it at the base of the cairn. Klaus Reinhardt stood beside Weber. The other 5 prisoners formed a line facing the flag. They stood at attention. Martin Bauer began singing Die Wacht am Rhein, a German military song. The other prisoners joined, 7 voices singing German lyrics at the summit of England's highest mountain at 6:23 in the morning. Whitfield watched from 15 feet away. He did not stop them. The song lasted 2 minutes. When it ended, the prisoners remained standing at attention for another minute of silence. Then Weber retrieved the flag, folded it, and placed it back in his pack. Whitfield approached Weber. Whitfield asked what the flag represented. Weber explained it was proof that German prisoners could still accomplish difficult tasks. That captivity had not destroyed their discipline or physical capability, that they remained soldiers even in confinement. Whitfield asked if Weber believed this climb was important. Weber said it was the most important thing he had done since being captured. Whitfield did not understand. He asked why climbing a mountain mattered when Germany was losing the war. Weber's face changed. He said carefully that if Germany was losing the war, then accomplishments like this were even more important. They were proof that German soldiers maintained honor and competence regardless of circumstances. Whitfield realized Weber actually believed Germany might still win. The guards had assumed all prisoners understood by August 1943 that Germany was losing. The North Africa campaign had collapsed. Italy was being invaded. The Eastern Front was deteriorating. But Weber and his companions apparently still maintained faith in eventual German victory. Whitfield decided not to argue. He told the group they had 15 minutes at the summit before descending. The prisoners used the time to rest and look at the view. Hans Keller sat on a rock and stared west toward the sea. Otto Schultz walked around the summit, examining the rock formations. Peter Lang made notes in a small notebook he had brought, documenting the climb details. Wilhelm Koch stood at the edge, looking down the western face of the mountain. Martin Bauer sat next to Klaus Reinhardt, and they shared water from a canteen. The descent began at 06:42 hours. The group moved faster going down. The prisoners maintained formation, but conversation increased. Weber walked with Whitfield, answering questions about mountain climbing technique. Klaus talked with Corporal Hutchinson about the Lake District geography. The mood was lighter. The prisoners had accomplished their goal. They seemed satisfied. The group reached the base of the main ascent at 07:45 hours. They stopped for a longer rest. Whitfield distributed chocolate rations that he had brought from camp supplies. The prisoners were surprised. Otto Schultz asked why British guards would share food with German prisoners. Whitfield said it was standard practice for supervised outings. The prisoners ate the chocolate slowly, making it last. Peter Lang commented that British chocolate was better than he expected. Private Ellis laughed and said, "Wait until they tried American chocolate," which some guards had received in care packages. The prisoners asked about American chocolate. Ellis explained it came in bars called Hershey's, sent to British troops as part of Lend-Lease supplies. The prisoners asked why America was sending chocolate to Britain. Ellis explained that America was supplying Britain with food, weapons, vehicles, everything needed for the war. The prisoners went quiet. Weber asked how much America was supplying. Ellis said billions of dollars worth, enough to feed both British civilians and prisoners, enough to equip armies fighting in Africa and preparing for Europe. Weber asked if that meant Britain could not fight without American help. Whitfield interrupted. He said Britain and America were allies fighting together. Neither could win alone. Both contributed what they could. The group resumed walking at 08:15 hours. The conversation ended. The prisoners walked in silence for 2 hours. They reached camp at 10:43 hours. Morrison met them at the gate. He asked Whitfield for a report. Whitfield confirmed the prisoners had completed the climb without incident. They had reached the summit, spent 15 minutes there, and returned without attempting escape or violating any terms. Morrison asked Weber if the climb was satisfactory. Weber confirmed it was. Morrison told Weber that additional recreational privileges were approved as promised. The prisoners could organize weekly outdoor exercise sessions within 3 meters of camp with guard supervision. Weber thanked Morrison and led his group back to their barracks. Dietrich was waiting inside. He asked for details. Weber described the climb, the summit, the flag, the song. Dietrich asked if the British guards had interfered. Weber said they had not. Dietrich asked if Weber felt the climb proved German physical superiority. Weber hesitated. He said the climb proved they could still accomplish difficult tasks, but the conversation during descent had raised questions. Dietrich asked what questions. Weber explained what the guards had said about American supplies, about billions of dollars of equipment, about Britain being unable to fight without American support. Dietrich said that was obviously propaganda designed to make Germany seem weaker by exaggerating Allied resources. Weber said maybe. But if it was true, if America was supplying Britain with everything needed for war, then Germany was fighting 2 countries, one with industrial capacity far beyond Europe. The climb became famous within Camp 186. Other prisoners asked to see the flag. Weber showed them the folded black and white cloth. Some prisoners asked to touch it. The flag became a symbol of German pride maintained in captivity. Dietrich organized a formal ceremony on August 21st. The flag was displayed in the camp common room. Dietrich gave a speech about the importance of maintaining military discipline and morale. He praised Weber and the 6 volunteers for demonstrating that German soldiers remained superior even in confinement. The speech was well received by about half the prisoners. The other half seemed less enthusiastic. Weber noticed the division. After the ceremony, Weber talked with Klaus Reinhardt. Weber said some prisoners no longer believed in Dietrich's theories. Klaus agreed. He said climbing a mountain did not change the reality of captivity. Germany was either winning or losing the war based on battles, not based on whether 7 prisoners could climb Scafell Pike. Weber asked if Klaus thought Germany was losing. Klaus said he did not know, but the British guards seemed confident, and if America was really supplying Britain with unlimited resources, then Germany was probably losing. Weber went to sleep that night thinking about the view from the summit, looking down at England from 3,209 feet, seeing the Irish Sea in the distance, understanding that Britain was an island with access to American supplies coming across the Atlantic. Understanding that Germany was a continental power surrounded by enemies and running out of resources. The climb had been meant to prove German superiority. Instead, it had shown Weber something different. In September 1943, Morrison authorized weekly outdoor exercise sessions as promised. Groups of 10 to 15 prisoners could take supervised walks in the Lake District with guard escorts. The walks became popular. Prisoners who had spent months confined to campgrounds discovered the landscape. Mountains, lakes, forests. The beauty surprised them. One prisoner, Feldwebel Johann Schmidt, told Weber that the Lake District looked like Bavaria. Another prisoner, Gefreiter Thomas Werner, said it looked like parts of Austria. The prisoners began to feel connected to the landscape in ways they had not expected. In October 1943, the war news changed. Italy surrendered. The Allied invasion of mainland Europe seemed inevitable. Camp morale shifted. Fewer prisoners attended Dietrich's committee meetings. More prisoners spent time in the library reading British newspapers. Weber read about the Eastern Front. Soviet forces were advancing, German cities were being bombed, the Ruhr industrial region was being destroyed. Weber tried to discuss this with Klaus. Klaus said he was no longer interested in debating whether Germany could win. Klaus said he was interested in surviving the war and returning home. Weber asked what if there was no home to return to. Klaus had no answer. By December 1943, Camp 186 received new prisoners from Italy and North Africa. The new arrivals brought stories of German defeats, Allied advances, deteriorating conditions in German units. The new prisoners were less confident than earlier arrivals. They talked openly about Germany losing. Dietrich tried to maintain morale through the committee meetings, but attendance dropped to fewer than 30 prisoners. Weber stopped attending in January 1944. He spent more time reading and walking during the supervised outdoor sessions. In March 1944, Weber was assigned to a work detail at a local farm 4 mi from camp. The farm needed labour for spring planting. Weber worked alongside British farmers and Italian POWs. The work was hard, 10-hour days planting potatoes and barley. But the farmer, Thomas Hartley, treated the prisoners fairly. He provided lunch, hot tea, and paid the camp for their labour. Weber learned that the pay was higher than camp tokens. The prisoners earned 1 shilling per day for farm work. Weber saved his earnings and bought extra cigarettes and writing paper at the camp canteen. In May 1944, the Allied invasion of France began. Camp 186 received news on June the 7th. The invasion was successful. Allied forces were establishing beachheads. German defenders were being pushed back. Weber heard the news and felt nothing. Not sadness, not anger, just empty certainty. Germany had lost. The war would continue for months or years, but the outcome was decided. Weber thought about the climb to Scafell Pike, the flag planted at the summit, the song sung in German, the belief that German soldiers were superior and would eventually prevail. Weber understood now that the climb had proven nothing about superiority. It had proven only that 7 healthy men could walk up a mountain. Any 7 British soldiers could have done the same. Any 7 American soldiers. Any 7 Soviet soldiers. Physical capability was not connected to national destiny or military outcome. In July 1944, Morrison announced that Camp 186 would host educational programs for prisoners interested in learning trades or skills. The programs included carpentry, mechanics, agriculture, English language study. Morrison explained that the programs were designed to help prisoners prepare for repatriation and post-war employment. Weber enrolled in English language study and carpentry. The classes met 3 evenings per week. The English instructor was a retired schoolteacher from Kendal named Margaret Fletcher. She was 62 years old. She had volunteered to teach German prisoners because she believed education prevented future wars. Margaret treated the prisoners with kindness and patience. She corrected their grammar without judgment. She explained English idioms and cultural references. She asked about their lives in Germany before the war. Weber told her about growing up in Stuttgart. Margaret told him about teaching school in Yorkshire during the Great War. She said she had taught boys who later died in France. She said she did not want to see another generation destroyed. Weber asked if she thought Germans and British could live peacefully after this war. Margaret said people could do anything if they chose to. Nations made wars, people made peace. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. Camp 186 received official notification on May 9th. Morrison assembled all prisoners in the main hall. He announced that Germany had surrendered unconditionally. The war was over. Allied forces occupied Germany. Prisoners would be processed for repatriation as soon as transportation could be arranged. The processing would take months, possibly a year. Prisoners should prepare for eventual return to Germany. The hall was silent. No one cheered. No one cried. The prisoners simply sat and absorbed the news. Weber felt relief. Not happiness, just relief that the killing was finished. Dietrich stood up and asked Morrison what would happen to prisoners during the processing period. Morrison said they would remain at Camp 186 or be transferred to other camps depending on repatriation schedules. They would continue working on local farms if they wished. They would continue receiving the same treatment as before. Dietrich asked if prisoners would be forced to work. Morrison said no. Work was voluntary. Prisoners who worked would continue earning wages. Prisoners who chose not to work would receive basic camp provisions only. Weber chose to continue working. He returned to Thomas Hartley's farm in May 1945 and worked through the summer and autumn. The work was familiar now. Weber knew the fields, the equipment, the routines. Hartley's daughter, Elizabeth, was 24 years old. She helped run the farm. She talked with Weber during lunch breaks. Elizabeth asked what Weber planned to do after returning to Germany. Weber said he did not know. He had no family left. His parents had died in an air raid in 1943. His brother had been killed on the Eastern Front in 1944. He had no home to return to. Elizabeth suggested Weber might consider staying in England. She said some prisoners were applying for permission to remain after repatriation. The British government was allowing certain prisoners to apply for work permits if they had employment offers. Weber asked if that was possible. Elizabeth said she would ask her father. Thomas Hartley confirmed that the farm needed permanent labour. He said he would sponsor Weber's application if Weber was interested. Weber thought about this for 3 weeks. He discussed it with Klaus Reinhardt. Klaus said he was returning to Germany. Klaus had family in Bavaria, but Klaus said he understood if Weber wanted to stay. Klaus said Germany would be destroyed and rebuilding would take decades. England might offer better opportunities. Weber made his decision in November 1945. He submitted an application to remain in England with employment sponsorship from Hartley's farm. The application required approval from the Home Office, the local police, and the camp commandant. Morrison approved it immediately. The police reviewed Weber's record and found no issues. The Home Office took 4 months to process the application. Weber received approval in March 1946. He was granted a 2-year work permit with possibility of extension. Weber was released from Camp 186 on March 22, 1946. He moved to a small cottage on Hartley's farm. He worked as a full-time farmhand with wages of £3 per week plus accommodation. Weber settled into the routine. Morning chores at 0600 hours. Fieldwork until 1800 hours. Evenings spent reading or walking in the Lake District. On weekends, Weber climbed mountains. He returned to Scafell Pike in April 1946. He walked the same route he had taken with the prisoners in 1943. He reached the summit at 0645 hours. The cairn was unchanged. Weber stood at the cairn and thought about the flag he had planted, the song they had sung, the belief that German soldiers were superior. Weber understood now that superiority had never been the point. The climb had been about maintaining dignity in defeat, about finding purpose in captivity, about believing that individual actions mattered when everything else seemed meaningless. Weber married Elizabeth Hartley in June 1948. They had 2 children. Weber became a British citizen in 1952. He worked on the farm for 37 years until retiring in 1983. He never returned to Germany. When asked about his experiences during the war, he would tell people about Camp 186, the climb to Scafell Pike, the flag, the song. He would explain that he had learned more about humanity during his time as a prisoner than he had learned during his years as a soldier. He learned that enemies could show mercy, that confinement could become opportunity. That defeat could lead to a better life than victory might have provided. Weber died on September 4th, 1991, in Kendal, England. He was 74 years old. His obituary mentioned his service in the Wehrmacht, his time at Camp 186, his work as a farmer. The obituary did not mention the flag or the song or the climb. But at his funeral, his daughter told the story. The story of a young German soldier who climbed England's highest mountain as a prisoner and planted a flag to prove German superiority. The story of a man who learned that mountains do not care about nationality. That landscape belongs to whoever walks on it. That home can be found anywhere if you are willing to let go of what you lost. The story of a prisoner who became a citizen because he understood that war ends, but life continues, and you can choose where to continue living. If this story moved you the way it moved us, hit that like button. Every like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about soldiers who found unexpected futures, real people, real transformations. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. United Kingdom, Germany, United States, Canada. Our community stretches across the entire world. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Friedrich Weber doesn't disappear into silence.